I'm Anya Coops-McKinnon. Welcome to the programme. Israel says its troops have entered southern Lebanon as its anticipated ground offensive gets underway. Now, Israel's military is carrying out what it's calling targeted ground raids against Hezbollah. The Iran-backed group says it launched missiles towards the headquarters of Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad. Now, Mossad is located near Tel Aviv, where explosions and air raid sirens have been heard. Hezbollah is denying that Israeli troops have entered Lebanese territory.
As Israel continues to fire air missiles into Lebanon, on the ground it is sending trucks carrying tanks across the border into southern Lebanon to undertake what the Israeli military is calling a targeted operation against militant group Hezbollah. IDF footage shows the troops preparing and an address by their unit commander.
We have a great privilege to write history, as we did in Gaza, to do the same here in the north. We started it with a more low-key operation, and today we are going to start a more significant maneuver and to return the residents of the north safely to their homes.
The Lebanese capital, Beirut, has been targeted by an increasing number of airstrikes in recent days. But its citizens still doubt that Israel will get to write this history as it wishes.
In my opinion, there is only a small possibility that Israel will be successful because the resistance remains strong. The narrative presented by Netanyahu is a distraction from the major failure that occurred in Gaza. It's a result of his inability to achieve the so-called total victory in Gaza.
Hundreds of thousands of people in Lebanon have already been displaced by the conflict, fleeing to other parts of the country or abroad. Hezbollah says its fighters are ready to retaliate against a ground offensive by Israel.
Joined now by Marina Miron, who's a military analyst at the War Studies Department at King's College London. Welcome, Marina. What can you tell us so far about the nature of Israel's ground incursion? I mean, is this likely, or is it likely that they are leading up to a full-scale invasion of southern Lebanon?
Good day, Anya. Well, it's difficult to judge at the moment. From what it looks like, the operation is supposed to be limited in order to create the said buffer zone. So at least in theory, that's the plan. And that's a plan with which the U.S. went for. And the problem here is no plan survives the first contact with the enemy. That being said, in theory, that's what Israel wants to do. However, whether it will lead to a full-scale incursion remains to be seen, but it is very possible because the nature of the fighting will be different from what we have seen in Gaza. And even for Gaza, there was a specific plan on how to advance. And we have seen how dynamic the battlefield was and how many times the IDF had to adjust its modus operandi. Therefore, it will, of course, depend on Israel's military goals. It will also depend on other actors and the international community and the support to Israel, but it is not to be excluded.
We know that Israel has seriously degraded Hezbollah's leadership structure. It has targeted hundreds of suspected weapons depots. Will Hezbollah actually be able to offer any serious resistance to Israeli ground forces?
Well, what we have to understand is that Hezbollah is a very capable, violent non-state actor. Therefore, decapitating the organization, that's in theory what Israel did, removing military commanders, removing the leadership, and hoping that this would deliver a fatal blow to the organization. It will be so disorganized internally that it will not be able to offer the resistance. Hence, we're seeing this incursion right now ongoing, because that is the logic. However, the question is, in how far did it cause damage to Hezbollah structure? And from my understanding, it's not quite as hierarchical as we might think. Therefore, I believe that there will be resistance, and we're seeing Hezbollah firing back at Israel already. And of course, we have to take into account that other actors such as Iran might get involved in this conflict to support Hezbollah, because that is Iran's main proxy.
I did want to ask you about Iran, but first I wanted to ask you, do you think that Israel is aiming to reoccupy southern Lebanon? I mean, you spoke about the fact that, best laid plans, it's hard to say what's going to happen. But do you think there is this aim, and do you think that is a wise strategy?
Well, again, as I said, it will depend on many factors and on how this operation evolves. Will it just end with pushing Hezbollah back? Then this area will be secure and stable, and then the Israelis will be able to return to their homes. That's the best case scenario, but this is probably not going to happen. So there might be a need to leave the forces there, to reoccupy the area in order to be able to control it and to prevent Hezbollah from going back to that area. So it is not to be excluded, and I think there is quite a high probability that it might be necessary. Whether it's a wise strategy, well, it depends on what Israel wants to achieve. It depends on the capabilities, and of course it also depends on what is going to happen with Lebanon, because we talk about this buffer zone, but Lebanon is on the brink of collapse, and that could create a power vacuum, inviting other violent non-state actors to fight for power. And we've seen that in Iraq after 2003, where Iraq descended into violence despite the initial success in the American operation. And therefore, this scenario could be repeated, meaning that Israel will have to decide whether it will want to take greater part in this or what its role will be. So difficult to make any projections here.
Marina, thanks so much for that. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but that was Marina Miron, military analyst from King's College London. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm joined now by Daniel Byman from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. He's also a professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and director of the Security Studies programme there. Welcome to DW. Pleasure to have you on the programme. Right now in Israel, the talk is about ground incursions. Can you tell me, do you think that we're about to see a full-scale Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon?
So Israel certainly has large numbers of troops at or near the border and is prepared for that. A lot is going to depend on how much resistance Israel encounters close to the border. And for now, at least, Israel has indicated that it's going to be a limited operation, that this is something that may not require huge numbers of troops. But these operations have a way of growing, and this conflict has steadily escalated. So certainly a much more massive operation is possible.
Does Israel think that it can force Hezbollah to withdraw to north of the Litani River and stay there without Israel actually having to reoccupy that region of Lebanon?
So in the last 3 weeks, we've seen this dramatic escalation by Israel in terms of going after Hezbollah in multiple ways, going after its fighters, going after its leaders, destroying its communications, significant bombing, and now ground operations. This is really designed to coerce Hezbollah, to force the organization to move back, and if it won't do so voluntarily, to use the ground operation to push it back without the group making that decision. The important caveat here is that this may not be to the Litani. It may just be several kilometers beyond the Israeli border to give people in the area a bit more breathing space. But there's a lot up in the air right now, and I don't think decisions have been fully made by Israel.
And do you think that Israeli political and military leaders believe that they can degrade Hezbollah as a fighting force to the extent that they have degraded Hamas in Gaza?
Certainly not to the extent they've degraded Hamas. That has involved almost a year of massive warfare in much of Gaza, huge numbers of troops. But in the last few weeks, Israel has hit Hezbollah hard, there's no question, in terms of senior leadership, rank and file members, and the group's military capabilities. So I wouldn't say use Hamas as a comparison, but I would say Israel believes, and I think correctly, that it can greatly reduce Hezbollah's military power But Hezbollah is a very strong organization with a lot of dedicated fighters, Iranian backing, so it's a very, very tough organization to beat.
Speaking of Iran, the US says that it has indications that Iran is preparing to launch a ballistic missile attack on Israel. Is a response from Iran very likely, do you think?
So Iran not only is a very strong supporter of Hezbollah, but Israel, of course, has done operations in Iran, and Iran has sworn revenge. So certainly it's a possibility. I would point out that in April, Iran did this massive rocket and missile attack on Israel that largely fizzled. And whether Iran has the capability to strike Israel effectively is a question mark.
Daniel Byman from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your analysis and insight.
Thank you for having me.